Welcome back to USC Primetime Live. It's the USC channel here at the Voice of College Football, presented by FanDuel. I'm your host, Crashlet Collier, joined by my co-host, Nolan Ezett. Unfortunately, Ethan Inman is busy with work, and Matt Zemek is not feeling well. We hope to have both of them back soon. But Nolan, great talking with you. How are you doing?
I'm good, Crash. Good as always. Yeah, looking forward to getting back to a crew of three or four and not too long. But yeah, for now it's back like the old days when we'd hold podcasts and occasionally just be the two of us. So yeah, let's run it.
Throw back to the scoreboard days. For those of you who don't know, Nolan and I hosted a podcast for Annenberg when I was still at USC. So great to kind of chop it up like the old times whenever Terrence couldn't make it.
Yeah.
All right. So let's get into obviously some news. Obviously, not a lot going on, but still definitely a few things obviously trickle out every week with regards to football. So definitely worth touching on. And the thing I think that kind of caught everyone's eye in the Trojan family, the way I saw it, Nolan, was that they're talking about at least giving Tobias Raymond starting reps at center this spring, which on the one hand, based on Ryan Karchi's reporting that I was reading in his Times of Troy yesterday morning, it makes sense in the regards of they see that as his best shot in the NFL. But on the other side, I'm kind of curious because it seems like you got all five starters returning, which I think is definitely huge for USC, where you had Elijah Page at left tackle, Raymond at left guard, Killian O'Connor, the former walk-on turned starting center who beat out Jayonre Reed, who was brought in for that job, Alani Noah at right guard, and then Justin Tainu at right tackle. So while I'm not saying I'm opposed to it, especially when you got all five going, and, we've talked before about just the importance of continuity, and that's something I've talked with USC football and Justin Deitch about the importance of continuity, especially along the O-line. It seems a little, I'm not saying I'm for it, but I'm also like, does this make sense when you have all five guys coming back? What are your thoughts on it, Nolan?
Yeah, continuity is really important with any part of a football team, but especially the offensive line. And that doesn't just mean retaining the same guys, but it means having everyone in the same position, right? Your left tackle's your left tackle, your left guard's your left guard, your center's your center, right guard, right tackle, and so forth. It's a little bit of a change. I'm sure Lincoln Riley and everyone in that locker room has got to be seeing something. They've got to be expecting something. It just doesn't make that much sense to me. And I know that Raymond did switch. I mean, he's switched around his fair share. He's played left tackle. He's played left guard. I think he's almost had an even split of games played at the left tackle and left guard position. So obviously he is versatile. And I know that this offensive line last year, not really as much by choice as it was by force, but it had a lot of adjustments, that offensive line. I think it was 7 total formations to start a game. It was almost like every game was some sort of new adjustment. So I think all of these players anyway have kind of gotten used to the fact that they have to know how to play basically every position on the line. It's just, if you have the ability to take any of your linemen and keep them there because you have 5 guys, you have the returning 5 guys, why change it? I don't know. It seems like a really, really interesting decision to me.
I absolutely agree. And I mean, on the one hand, like you said, there were the injuries last year, and just a big credit has to go out to Zach Hansen. I mean, I know I don't think we've praised him enough on this show just for how he managed to really work that. And I think that's kind of the biggest difference between him and when Josh Henson was the offensive line coach, was just how under Henson, just one guy goes down, it just messed up everything, as we saw, especially I think in 2023 and 2024. But this past season, 2025, with Hansen as the O-line coach, you've just seen how he's been able to just make it work. I mean, I don't know how. I mean, if you believe in miracles and you want to say he's a miracle worker, like, go ahead. Like, I guess it warrants it. But pretty much, I think it just shows, like, I'm not saying, I guess in that regard, though, I do want to point out if, are they maybe playing for is there an injury angle at here? Like, because let's be honest, football is brutal. Injuries are inevitable. Like, you have to think that maybe they're playing for, like, okay, if someone gets injured, do guys know how to play multiple positions, especially in that O-line, and have that continuity? So I'm just really, like, kind of curious about what that's going to look like in that regard, because I think it's, definitely a very, interesting thing.
Yeah, I mean, that's one thing that if the main purpose of this is to make sure regardless of injuries, which we know what can happen to this offensive line. We know what can happen to any offensive line. Offensive linemen are at the forefront of all physicality in football. We know what can happen to offensive line, and we saw it last year. If the goal of this is to make sure that everyone on that line knows how to play at least one other position, all for that. No reason why that should not be a priority of this team. But I mean, first of all, Raymond has already played left tackle and left guard. He's played two positions for a large portion of his career. Second of all, if this is implemented truly in games, that is something that, to me, it's a last resort to switch someone to a different position. You do that, like, definitely in practice, maybe give them a couple reps, but it's going to be interesting to see, like, how much in practice is he actually playing center? Is this like how much are we committing to this? I guess I love it as a safety precaution. Get everyone on this line used to playing every other position on the line. But is this like a full commitment decision? If so, it feels really early to me.
For sure. And then now the one thing I want to ask you about next in regards to this is, what does this do about Killian O'Connor, who, as I mentioned earlier, went from being a walk-on. Who knows if he ever was going to play? Like, we did not know. Saw multiple guys. And I mean, going back to kind of the idea of that USC has repeatedly shifted guys, as I've mentioned, obviously there's Brett, at least from when Riley's here, there's Brett Nealon, then Justin Dedich, then Jonah Monheim. And Dedich and Monheim played multiple O-line positions throughout their careers at USC. And that was something I touched on with Dedich when I interviewed him last year. And that he talked about how he came in as the center, got moved around a bunch, then eventually ended his career at center. But now I'm just wondering, what's this do to O'Connor, who's had to see multiple of the Dedich and Monheim moved in front, shifted over and put in front of him, as well as John Ray Reed, who he got a great opportunity to compete with. Someone who, by the way, Reed was like, I got no problem competing with this guy because he does it the right way. And that's something that I really do respect about O'Connor. And I'm just wondering, what does this say about Killian O'Connor? Are they trying to keep the competition? Or what does it say about Killian O'Connor? And I'm wondering, because it's just maybe I'm a little biased because, I know him pretty well. I've talked to him before. And obviously, he's a guy that's easy to like as a USC fan because of that story. The guy who didn't give up, the guy who refused to go away, the guy who bet on himself when no one else would bet on him. I don't want to say that, USC is necessarily undermining him, but that was kind of my first reaction when I read that yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, if I was him, I would easily take this as disrespect. Like, how could you not take that as disrespect, right? Like, at the very least, you're turning this into a competition, right? And that, to me, if you're supposed to be a starter at any position, and that was the expectation, I am gonna take it personal that the coaching staff obviously has at least some level of distrust in me. Whether you want to frame it as distrust in O'Connor, or rather, two great offensive linemen battling it out. I guess that's a different way that you could possibly phrase it. But I think it does show a little bit of a level of distrust in O'Connor, and I guess just how this offensive line was formed entirely. But I mean, O'Connor's a center. Like, I don't know how I feel about changing much of this offensive line at all, but I think it says at least something about the level of confidence that they have in what this line was last year and how that is going to develop this year. They're trying to change something.
For sure, yeah. I mean, I think definitely, on the one hand, though, I'm not opposed to the competition thing. And at the end of the day, I also think that, I think the best comp 5 guys should play at the end of the day. I'm not opposed to that. And I get, sports is cutthroat. I mean, obviously, it's just how it goes. I mean, I've seen, obviously, I'm not going to put anything, name names or anything, or just throw out, what I've seen. But I've seen it where it seems like, you think someone's going to get it. Someone else comes in or gets moved over, whatever it is. And suddenly they're the starter. And that person who maybe thought they were going to be the starter is sitting on the bench. So, and I get that that's a part of sports, but I'm wondering though how O'Connor's taking it. And just, I guess he probably has I'm going to assume he might have the right mindset about it, just given how he's, obviously overcome so much in his career to, beat out J. Reed for that spot after Reed was brought in for the center job for the 2025 season. So I'm really curious, like, just what's this going to mean for O'Connor? And like, is it a competition? Because I think that he can't, I'm wondering, is it just that? Because I've heard that, and definitely in some ways you do want the competition so that way you don't get complacent. So what do you think about that aspect of it, Nolan?
Yeah, I mean, so that's also what I was going to bring up. Is this actually a competition, right? Like, is the coaching staff actually seeing who is the best starting center or who would be the best starting center for this team? Or is it to spur competition? You always see this. I mean, it doesn't really happen as much with like veteran linemen, but you see it a lot at the quarterback position, especially in the NFL, but I guess in college too, not really announcing a starter until right before the season starts. And it's because you want both guys to be going at it. And yeah, obviously you do have, at least any good coach should have in the back of their mind, I'm going to start whoever looked the best in practice, or at least who I think is the most game ready right now. But I think a lot of times you have those competitions really to push, I mean, in the NFL, to push a rookie or maybe a second year player who didn't start his rookie year to really be ready this time around, right? In college, I don't feel like I see it as much with a veteran with veteran offensive linemen. That's what's confusing to me. But if the logic here really is to push and anyone on this line to be the best version of themselves, I have absolutely no complaints. But again, it's a question of, is this actually a competition or is it a staged competition? Essentially, I feel like it's almost kind of what you were implying, right? Like, yeah, it's always a competition, but does the coaching staff know who they're going to start and they just want to make sure no one gets complacent? I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case, but I feel like I don't really see that much with veteran offensive linemen. They're kind of cemented in their place.
Well, you bring up a good example with the quarterbacks, Nolan, and I think we saw that especially a couple of years. And I mean, obviously, I think we see it most in quarterbacks because there's really no position like quarterback in all of sports. If we're being completely honest, it's if you're the quarterback and you're the starter, you are the guy. You're getting all the reps. You're out there every offensive play until suddenly you're not and you're benched. And then your backup's getting all the reps. Like, it's not like receivers. Obviously, there are times where maybe you do something like what Urban Meyer did in 2006 with Chris Lee getting the team in the red zone and then Tim Tebow finishing the job into the end zone. You don't see that much, but in general, it's like when you're the quarterback, you're the guy until you're not. We saw that last year with, like I said, with Miller Moss. He was the guy until until he ultimately lost the job and Jane Mayava took over. But there's so much more exposure on the quarterbacks. But obviously with O-line, it's not as top. I mean, I feel like obviously since we are doing a show about USC football, of course we talk about it, but most fans generally aren't keeping up as close tabs on it as in general. So it's definitely very interesting for sure. But I also think that at the same time, if, they do move Raymond over to center, who's going to take over at left guard is then kind of my question. And looking at the depth chart, the most likely answer would then be, are they going to make Micah Banuelos the starting left guard in that spot? And then what happens to O'Connor then is kind of my big questions.
I mean, do you think so that's, I guess, the other thing. The two elements here are, one, how does shifting the offensive line, although certainly very, very early in the offseason, so there's plenty of time to get used to it, but how does shifting that offensive line, first of all, just affect the performance of an offensive line when this is now a new formation that they have? But then second of all, is O'Connor gone? I mean, I guess I kind of want to ask your prediction. If truly his job has been taken at center, is he the backup center now? Does he go to left guard? Like, what do you think is the most likely scenario if he really is no longer the starting center?
I have a tough time. I'm not sure. I mean, as far as I know, O'Connor was always in that, at least on the depth charts from what I saw, he was always in that center position. Granted, he really had to work his way up, and I think was kind of more concentrated since he wasn't necessarily really coveted. Remember, he's a walk-on. Obviously, he's earned a scholarship last year. Could not have been happier for the guy. There was no one on that team more deserving, in my opinion, for everything that for all the blood, sweat, and tears he has put into this program. Like I said, you have to respect it. But I'm wondering, would you then elevate Micah Banuelos? Is this a longer term play since they'll both Raymond and Banuelos are redshirt juniors? So assuming they both don't go to the NFL, you get at least one more year out of them, whereas O'Connor is in his final year of eligibility. So I'm very curious about that. But I'm not sure. I feel like it could go. I feel like Raymond is probably going to be a starter. It's just a question of where. And then the question is, are you moving O'Connor to left guard, trying that out? And then I guess the same question based on what Karchi was saying is, where do they think O'Connor's best? Because obviously he mainly had to just grind it out at center to just give himself the best chance, at least the way I see it. Or do they move Raymond, or do they shift Raymond to center and then elevate Banuelos? And then, or do they move O'Connor to left guard, or do they just switch the two? So I really don't know. I would probably think that Raymond's a starter, and then probably they keep O'Connor. I probably think there'd be things kept as is, but I think in general, it's just interesting because it was just like, damn, there's something that I'm missing in O'Connor? Because you know what? I get it. Like, I've had my fair share of criticisms of every sports team at USC when I talk about them both here and on my own show Behind the Caution Tape. But at the same time, I will acknowledge I'm not at practice every day, so I don't know what's always going on behind the wall in Howard Jones.
Yeah, no, that's valid. I was really, really, really surprised when I heard the news, just because, again, like I think I've already said this, but you don't like. There's always that graphic of number of offensive line changes this game, or number of offensive line formation, or different number of offensive line formations this season, because the offensive line is the one thing that you cannot change the formation of. Linebackers, if someone's out, okay, fine, fill someone in, and not that they don't work together, but you send someone on a blitz. It's not like they're communicating super extensively with the inside linebacker. Defensive line, kind of same thing. You know your role. Offensive line, you are communicating like no one else is. The offensive line and the quarterback, those are the two positional groups that you're going to be communicating the most. I was so surprised, and it kind of made me think that the coaching staff knew something about O'Connor. Total speculation, but just the way I see it, O'Connor seems like a great person to have in the locker room, great locker room guy, and just great person to have on the football team and on the football field. And I think you have actually more experience with him and can actually attest to that. So to me, it was very, very, very surprising. I have no idea. And honestly, I really don't think that O'Connor's job is in jeopardy one bit. But if it is, I think they might be promoting someone to the starting left guard rather than moving O'Connor there. O'Connor he seems like the center to me, and if his job's been taken, it seems like he's the second string. And I personally, I don't think I would support that. I think you got to keep this offensive line exactly as it was expected to be. It's not very often that you get 5 returning guys.
I actually do want to clarify something that Jeff Rodriguez brought to my attention. So Jeff, thank you for catching me on this about Mike and Banuelos. It turns out he did transfer to Purdue. So that, I guess, actually does throw something else in. And I guess, granted, I was going off of last year's depth charts just to give myself a general reference. I should have double checked that. So that is, that's my bad right there. I will own that. But still, at the same time, if you don't have Banuelos, obviously, who are you then going to put at left guard is then my question. And so that's kind of then, even regardless of who it is, I mean, like I said, I'm owning my mistake, but at the same time, you can put kind of any offensive lineman's name behind Tobias Raymond at left guard. It still is like, who are you going to put there if you move Raymond over to center, is then my question. And then also, I mean, like I said, obviously, like I said, with, everything going on last year with O'Connor, and there are a lot of injuries, sometimes you have to make those moves, but you don't just want to make them just because you have the ability and flexibility. So I think really it's going to be interesting. But then the other thing I noted in that Times of Troy, moving away from Raymond, but staying on the subject of the O-line, is going to be 5-star freshman Keonye Pepe is going to start working at a right tackle. So I'm just wondering what that's going to do for the offensive line, especially when you have Justin Taonu coming back for his redshirt sophomore year.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of, I guess that kind of jumps into the conversation we had last week, but and I think I made it very well known that I was very big fan of building a strong foundation with younger guys, and also, by the way, I agree with all the comments that you just displayed, and I think this kind of goes hand in hand with that. But I think it's definitely important to build a strong foundation at any positional group, but offensive line, considering the number of injuries that is inherent within any offensive line, and especially seeing what happened in this line last year, I think it's very important, first of all, to have, again, the comment that was just displayed. You do need to have a backup, honestly, for anyone on this line, if not two. Yeah, exactly that comment right there. That was a great observation. It would be foolish to not have a backup. I don't even want to call it a backup, but someone who can fill in, I guess, if needed. But then, Crash, to your point, having other 4 stars and 5 stars really start to learn the basics, start to help build this foundation, I think is going to be critical, because we saw not just last year how much an offensive line can get injured, but we've also seen some incredible offensive lines under Lincoln Riley. I'm especially thinking 2022. And we've also seen some offensive lines that have really struggled and put the quarterback under a lot of pressure. And so my hope here is that when you're returning these guys and then you have some really good prospects and just younger guys in general who are massive, hopefully that creates kind of a continuous flow of some big boys up front that will protect whoever the quarterback is at any given year.
For sure, and that's especially what I think is going to be critical for Jade Mayava heading into his final season of eligibility, considering that his receivers, unless someone really breaks out or just goes off, he does not have Makai Lemon or Jacoby Lane. So the protection that he is going to need at the O-line is going to be so much more critical than it was last year. Not that last year wasn't good, because it absolutely was, and especially, and maybe even, well, but I guess my point is, it was good, especially when you consider all the injuries that piled up and just how many times, like we've talked about repeatedly already tonight, just everything that this line has gone through, and still how it managed to hold up. Obviously, I think at the start, like it was the Illinois game when O'Connor first went down, JeAndre Reed, I think, messed up that one trick play that I think that Makai Lemon pulled off. But still, other than that, I thought after that, he really, did a great job, really filling in there and obviously, keeping the continuity solid. So I don't think it hurts to explore, but at the same time, when it's just reported like this, I think it's just definitely, obviously, I think it just definitely, still has to, it's definitely just is an interesting thing to, just let loose this early in the season. So I think it's really critical, but at the same time, just all this is going to be really, I think, interesting to follow, especially now that it's, kind of secrets out, we're opening the competitions. And like I said, that's not inherently a bad thing. Cody Kessler himself even told me, you want the competition, at least granted that's quarterback, but still he's like, you want to have to earn that job every day. So I think it's going to be definitely really interesting to see how this all plays out on the, not just obviously with where does Raymond end up, where does O'Connor end up, who's going to be the left tackle, who's going to be the center, and also all the other pieces. Does Pepe end up being a major player? What about Kalen Miller, Justin Tanu, just to name names? I'm really, I don't know what's going to happen at this point, but it'll definitely be interesting to follow. I think this is a development that we definitely should keep following, and especially I'd really, if it, as more news on this comes out, I definitely love to, hear, especially from Matt and Ethan when they're back.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I know that the conversation here is offensive line, but I do want to touch on one thing that you mentioned, because I know you talked about Mayav and how he's not going to have the receiving core next year that he just had. He's not going to have Makai, Jacoby. It's not going to be the same. But I think if you went back a year and discussed who Mayava would have to throw to, you wouldn't be talking about Makai Lemon and Jacoby Lane in the same light that we kind of think about them now. They were, and that's not to dismiss what they'd done the year prior. They were clearly strong wideouts, but Makai Lemon and Jacoby Lane were not 2 years ago what they were just this past season. So I will say, just give the receivers the benefit of the doubt. I think you could be very surprised at what some of these receivers can do given the coaching staff. And not that doesn't mean you don't have to have a good offensive line, but having a strong wide receiver core instantly getting separation definitely makes it easier for the quarterback to get the ball out of his hands in 2 or 3 seconds. And maybe you don't die just with a mediocre offensive line because of that.
Jeff Rodriguez in the comments very much agreeing with you, Nolan. Jeff, as always, making very smart, intelligent points that just help really bring out the best in all of us and just learning more about just USC football, enhancing the discussions, really bring a lot of great points. So just really thank you, Jeff, always. Like with your comment, I think Hines and the transfer Williams can get done at wide receiver along with the transfer tight end and Mark Bowman. So really, I think obviously, like I said, just wanted to bring that up because you talked about just obviously not too worried about the receivers. Obviously, I think I'm not trying to dismiss anyone that's coming up, but I just was saying just because they haven't exactly been proven, whereas at least in that first and 2024, Lemon and Lane, at least we kind of saw a bit of what they were capable of. But then obviously once, Zachariah Branch and Deuce Robinson skip town and just clearly opened the door for them to be the two guys, the 1A and 1B on that receiver. But I'm definitely, especially excited to see what Tanuk Hines can do. I liked what I saw from him last year in the glimpses I got.
Yeah, no, there were some strong highlights from him. And again, I'll echo your point. I don't think he showed the highlights that Mekhi Lemon showed the year prior. But again, I don't know. If there's anything that I have faith in this coaching staff, it's to produce high quality quarterbacks and a wide receiver room. So
for sure. And Jeff, just bring up another good point of just it's a weird year not having a cemented number one going into camp. So this is another interesting position battle to follow up on the offensive line. So I think, or just on the offense in general, not the offensive line, pardon me. So now let's turn to our sponsored segment with FanDuel. And tonight's game is going to be men's basketball, obviously with football all over. We got to turn to basketball. So pretty much, fortunately for us, our show runs at a very good time tonight, obviously with it being an 8 p.m. Pacific time tip-off at Poly Pavilion. We'll be done right at 8, and you'll be able to turn on your TVs and get watching that game if you're not going. So obviously this one, USC being 6.5-point underdogs, money lines juice for UCLA, 300, 240 for USC, and then the over-under 150, I believe that is, if I'm reading that right. On there, over-under is 150. So what are your thoughts on this, Nolan?
Yeah, I think Vegas did a very strong job. I think FanDuel did a very good job with this. If I was going to take anything, I would absolutely take the money line. It feels like every year either USC or UCLA is in both football and basketball. Football almost always USC having the edge, basketball UCLA having the edge. Seems like there's always clearly a better team, and the game is almost 50-50. And then with basketball, especially once you have, you're obviously USC and UCLA playing twice a year, almost always USC and UCLA split. Sometimes it's not always that USC wins at Galen and UCLA wins at Poly. Sometimes it's USC takes one on the road, UCLA takes one on the road. But to me, USC plays UCLA exceptionally well. And now UCLA and USC, I think they have the same exact record. UCLA is definitely the better squad, in my opinion. But USC can go toe-to-toe with UCLA at any given point. USC also knows they absolutely have to win. I mean, they've got to win at least 2 more games to make March Madness. UCLA, I guess, the same, but I think UCLA is going to be favored in a lot of these games, whereas USC, not so much. So it's really full steam ahead for USC. And yeah, I don't know. I would go with the money line. I think the over-under and the spread are exactly what I would have placed it at. What about yourself?
I think this spread is a little too high, and then I think I'd take the over. Money line, obviously, I think that's about right, but I think it's going to be a closer game than what FanDuel is predicting, just because obviously it's a rivalry game, so it means more. But then also I don't know what's going to happen with both these teams. These teams seem like they can go toe-to-toe with the best, but also lose to the best. But they can go toe-to-toe with the best and also lose to the worst. I think UCLA, get that UCLA would be favored. Obviously, while they have the both record of both 18-9, UCLA has done a little bit better in conference play. I believe the Bruins are 10-6 in conference, whereas USC is 7-9 in Big Ten play, if I have that correct. So it makes sense that, they'd be favored, maybe not by this much. And obviously UCLA does have the home court. But I think it could be an interesting game, especially just you see obviously how USC had just had that loss that they should not have had to Oregon, game they had, by the way. And we've seen this a few times. Maybe not as bad, as brutal as that, but we've seen some brutal losses from the Trojans this year for sure. But then also we've seen UCLA just, obviously struggle on the road. Mick Cronin cannot talk about that enough. And I mean, hell, even going to maybe a new low, in my opinion, with the player ejection. So I just don't know what's going to happen this game, but I think it's going to be a lot closer than what FanDuel was thinking. But I think it could be high scoring, especially now that USC has Chad Baker-Mazara back, their leading scorer. And he's now, has a game back under his belt after being out for about a little over 2 weeks, or about 2 weeks, whatever it was.
Yeah, I'd say once you add in CBM plus obviously Usar, who's been awesome this year, and he's I think in the month of February he's averaging closer to 14 or 15 a game. So I mean he's been getting better, still on very 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 strong efficiency. Elijah Arenas obviously has been on a tear this year. I could see it going over. If I had to place a bet on the over under, I'd probably say the over. These are two teams that play each other really well, and somehow one of them always just ends up knocking down a bunch of threes. These teams play each other very well, and if I was gonna place a bet on the over under, I probably would go the over. But for me, money line is always the move between these two. You just kind of take the underdog, and you're getting a good value between them. What I would add though is USC has not won a basketball game, in over 2 weeks. And they know that USC's got to win at least two more to have a shot at making the tournament. And you're in a drought of close to 2.5 weeks. You've got to win. And I'm not always a big believer in like which team wants it more, because I don't ever think a team wants it more. I think when you're talking about, starting athletes at, D1 programs, everyone wants it. Everyone wants to make the NCAA tournament, but USC has not won in, I don't want to call it a very long time, but they're in a drought. And that's something that I'll put it this way. If USC is a team that is capable of making real damage in the NCAA tournament, they're a team that would win this game. You haven't won in over 2 weeks. You need to win at least 2 more games. This game, if you win it right here, means you only have to win 1 more for the rest of the year. If this is a team that is capable of causing real damage in the NCAA tournament, that team would win today. I'll put it that way.
For sure. I'm just going to add this before we get to our next segment. Wanting it is not something you can turn on and off. Wanting it is a process. And that process starts not even like when summer camp starts. It starts like when you just first get into it. It's like when you just write down your goals for like whatever period of time. Like, and that's just a life thing too. That's just not a basketball thing or a sports thing. It's like, if you want something, you got to have a plan to get there. And that's what USC needs to figure out. Do they want to get to March Madness is the big question that I think we will probably get at least some clarity on tonight, hopefully. And hopefully it's in the direction we're all hoping once we end the show and turn on our TVs. So let's now move on to our next segment in the show. And that is just the Big Ten and their plan to expand the college football playoff to 24 teams and, in essence, eliminate conference championship games. Nolan, what are your just thoughts, like straight up after just hearing about that?
So the thing that really stood out to me was, other than having a 2014 playoff, is eliminating conference championship games. And at this point, I don't see how you can't eliminate conference championship games, because now we're starting to get into the argument of, like, I don't know, for example, like a lot of people didn't even want, like, Alabama in the playoff, and it's like, well, are you going to punish them because they got that extra loss for making the SEC championship? And at this point, there's so many hypotheticals of what if you're a team that's you're kind of a quote unquote bubble team, but you make it to your power 2 or power 4 conference, however you want to split it. You make the conference championship, and then you lose. Do you get punished for that? Like, what if you lose, 42-6? Like what happens? And I know we haven't gotten into all this, but this playoff has only been here for 2 years. We're opening a huge can of worms by allowing a very small number of teams into a playoff and having a conference championship game where there's no clear instruction on whether or not that should count toward and against, or should it not count at all toward a team's probability of making the 12-team playoff. So personally, I'm 100% in support of removing the conference tournaments or the conference championship game. What I am not in support of is making it a 24-team playoff, for the pure reason that if we had this conversation after the first rendition of the 12-team playoff, no one would be asking for a 24-team playoff. The reason the Big Ten is asking now is because of what happened this most recent year, where there were quite a few teams that were left out. But that line changes every year. At some point, it's going to be there's 10 teams that need to be in it. Sometimes it's going to be there's 16 teams, sometimes 20 teams, sometimes 8 teams. You kind of just have to set a number and run with it instead of try to change it every year.
Well, I think that's what we're seeing, obviously, and that's just the debate we have every year with March Madness, and that is going through its own controversy, and that is pissing me off too. That is another discussion, though. I will not get off topic, but it's the same idea, that it's obviously, I think we can, I don't want to speak for you, but at least the way I've seen it is, obviously we got rid of the conference championships. That might eliminate part of this problem, but even if you don't, just going to 16 teams then just eliminates these massive, just like 3.5 week time off, just off time for the teams that get the buys. Like, I think the buys we can probably all have seen have not worked. They've succeeded at a 12.5% rate in 2 years, I think, if I did my math correctly, with Indiana this year's national championship being the lone team to have a bye and actually, and actually win that opening round game. So I think it's really something that just really need to expand to 16, do the 5 and 11. I think that's fine. The one thing I think 24 is just too much. I think we just need to set a number at some point and just be like, all right, this is our number. This is our format. This is what we will be doing. If you don't like it, tough luck. Be better next year. Be so good we have no choice but to put you in. Obviously, there's some caveats in there I don't like, specifically that school we're no longer playing in Notre Dame, but that's, like I said, that's different discussion. But generally, it's like, if you want to be in it, it's how I look at the Shaun White mindset. If you want to be in, you got to be blatantly better than the other guys, so we have no choice but to put you in. Is kind of how I look at it. The only thing I do like about this current 24 team playoff is that they've eliminated, there's only one automatic qualifier, and that's just to ensure the group of 6 schools can at least get a team in, and feasibly they might get a couple in. Otherwise, it'll just be 23 straight, and I'm not opposed to that, because that probably covers all the Power 4 teams most likely, plus then at least one group of 6 school, which I think is just good for the sport that you include them and just avoid. And college sports just need to avoid lawsuits, because you exclude the group of 6, see you in court. So that's really the only thing I guess I can get behind, is it's like, it wasn't the previous ridiculous, 4-4-2-2-1-1-1, whatever it was, that format. But I like kind of that they're just trying to, make it so it's actually easier to earn, and not just based on what conference you're in ahead of time. But other than that, really, it's like something I'm not too crazy about. And really, I think it should just be, we go to 16, we leave it at that, and then just adjust that. Because eventually, if we just can settle on a format, people will just be like, we'll just come to understand, okay, you know what? We didn't make it this year. Tough. Oh, well, we didn't do well enough, but great year. Let's go in a bowl game.
The one thing that I really want to focus on and double down on that you said was, if you don't make it because you just narrowly missed the cut, wherever that cutoff may be, especially now that it's 12 teams, whether it be 12, 16, 20, 24, whatever it may be, if you miss it, be better. Don't lose those games. Don't lose those 1 point, 2 point, 3 point margin of victory. Be the team that has a 3 point margin of victory, not a 3 point margin of defeat in an important game. Because if you look at both of the winners of the last 2 years with the 12-team playoff, when there were clear favorites and clear teams that no one really thought had much of a chance, we're starting, both of the teams, Ohio State and Indiana, were of the better teams. Now, maybe Indiana was the only 1 seed, but Ohio State was one of the favorites too. Like, I'm not saying that, if we expand it to a 24-team playoff, that we're never going to have the 20th best team or 20th ranked team win the tournament. Yes, that may happen. We see what happens in March Madness. But even look at March Madness. It's usually a 1, 2, or a 3 seed. And I'd say the same thing for football. What we've seen right now is that there are obviously better teams, and the teams that, have a good shot, have the best shot of winning, are not teams that are on the cusp, right? If Alabama won, if Oklahoma won, then I'd say, well, these teams were really close to not being included in the 12-team playoff. Maybe we need to expand it more. Those aren't the teams that are winning. I'm still in favor of maybe expanding a little bit. If you want to do 16, that's fine, but you've got to cut it at some point. And again, like, if you expand it to 16 and you can't make that, I'm sorry, you just don't deserve to make the playoffs. Like, maybe you're a Notre Dame where you could have beaten anyone, but you don't deserve to make it. You got to win your games early in the year. Every game matters. It's college football. It's not the NFL. It's not the NBA, and it's certainly not the MLB. You got to win every game.
I do want to mention a couple things actually that you brought up. But I think obviously the expansion, I'm wondering in part if that just keeps getting tied to athletic director and coaching contracts. I've heard that one where you talk about, if let's say an AD or coach has a bonus in their contract if their team makes the playoff, naturally they're going to be incentivized to expand it. So that way their odds of increasing their paycheck increase. Like, that's, I think, has to be part of it, at least from what I've been hearing, especially when John Wilner and John Canzano talk, at least with regards to March Madness expansion. And I have to think that some of that has to at least be at play, especially for those SEC and Big Ten directors, with those two conferences basically getting to dictate what happens with the playoff. And then the other thing I want to mention that you brought up was the teams that won, Ohio State, Indiana. Now, granted, Ohio State was an 8 seed. That was part because of how they weirdly structured it with the 4 highest conference championships getting the bye. That was changed for this year. But then also, just Ohio State just lost a game that they probably should have won against Michigan. So, but even that, it just shows like generally the teams that win, especially in football, it's not basketball or baseball where you can just have one. If you can just get hot at the right time, you can go far in the tournament, in the postseason. Football is generally not like that. And the reason you expand the playoffs isn't to give more teams a chance. It's to give more teams a chance to believe that they can win. That was an article I read a couple of years ago after the first one with all the controversies with like Alabama being left out, SMU getting in, Indiana having a lot of scrutiny that first year of everyone saying, oh, they didn't deserve it, which I'm still going to stand by. Yeah, maybe they didn't beat anybody, but they lost the 2 teams that played for the championship in their defense in that first year under Signetti. But yeah, you expand the playoff to create the belief that more teams can win, give more teams access, a belief. It makes the sport more exciting, in my opinion. So I fully agree with that article that I read a couple of years ago. My dad sent me, I can't remember where it was from. If I can ever find it, I'd be happy to share it. But it was definitely a very interesting read for sure about just why you expand it, but then how it seems like we're kind of going down a slippery slope of now our ADs and coaches just maybe looking after their paychecks.
Well, I also thought what was interesting to me, and I'm curious what you have to say about this. The Big Ten proposed this, and the way it seems to me, I mean, obviously we no longer have a Power 5, and for football purposes, we don't have a Power 4. It's a Power 2, right? It's the SEC and the Big Ten. And, some people have alleged SEC bias. I feel that SEC bias is a thing. But I'd also say that the SEC always is very, very top heavy, right? Like you always, I mean, half of that top 10, half of the top 12 is going to be SEC. Whether it's some rotation of, Alabama, Georgia, LSU, Ole Miss, Texas A&M, Tennessee. The list kind of goes on. But all those teams, some of the teams like Alabama and Georgia are always there. Oklahoma kind of too. But you've got other teams that are rotationally there. Half of that top 10 or 15 is going to be there. The Big Ten, they've got their Ohio States, and Penn State's usually supposed to be there, although this year they weren't. But then you've got all these like Michigan, USC's. This is the state that we're in right now. And even Iowa's, now Nebraska's, a bunch of teams that are routinely inside the top 25, but kind of struggle to consistently make the top 10. Maybe Michigan's an exception. Maybe this is my recency bias, but the Big Ten has a lot of teams that would really benefit from a 2014 playoff, because the Big Ten has a lot of teams that are consistently in that like 15 to 24 range, whereas the SEC, I feel like all of those elite teams are like safely inside the top 15. And if you're not in the top 15, you're not close to the top 25. Maybe every once a year they'll have like Tennessee was a good example this year of a team that was kind of floating around the top 25, but the Big Ten had a lot of them. And so to me, it makes sense that the Big Ten is the one proposing this, because the Big Ten, at least recently, would have had more to gain from that. I don't know about if you kind of agree or if you just think that's a coincidence, but
it makes sense actually. And I think the Big Ten, kind of wants to, well, at the end of the day, like, let's just be honest about something just in college athletics in general. Everybody, and it doesn't matter where you're talking individuals, teams, conferences, the NCAA itself, college football playoff, no matter who you are, where you work, or what conference your employer is affiliated with, everybody is looking out for themselves and is doing what is in their best interests. So Tony Petitti is doing what's best for the Big Ten, as he is being told to, most likely, I think, and very much by his Big Ten bosses, the 18 schools that he reports to. So it makes sense that he's looking at and being like, maybe he's having some idea in it. I think just you look at it and he's just going, yeah, like, this is what I think. I'm doing this. I'm trying to sell it one way, but he's doing it because, yeah, you're right. There'd be a ton of Big Ten teams that would benefit from it, that are just floating around there in that top 20 that would easily have made an expanded 24-team tournament. Whereas I think the SEC knows, like you said, they're top heavy. They're fine with a 16-team playoff because they're banking on getting about half those spots in addition to their AQ. So that's why I think it's different. That's why I think they've hit this lockstep now where Sankey's like, we're good with 16, and if they don't like it, we got a format that works. Whereas Petitti's like, no, we need to expand it. And I think the difference is Greg Sankey, being a college athletics lifer, is so much better at selling his narrative and selling his vision for college football, and knows that you have to sell the public on it. Whereas Petitti isn't necessarily, from what I've learned, is as comfortable on camera. He more prefers to work behind the scenes. But with something like this, you have to face the music. You have to be in front of the camera and sell your vision. So I think really, go ahead. Sorry.
Finish that thought, but then also I'd like to hear your thoughts. Do you think it will become a 2014 playoff, or is 16 about as much as it's going to get?
I'm not sure, because Petitti was trying to say, I'll go to 16 if you agree to go to 24. But I think it'll probably go to 16 and probably stay there, because I think Sankey, in general, while the SEC hasn't won, their depth is better. So I think that gives them, even if they're not winning the national championship, which is the ultimate flex, I think their depth has been more solid in recent years. And so I think they have the leverage there. And I think Sankey's basically saying, like, if they don't want to go to 24, we have something that's working for everybody. Like, and I think obviously I'm not a fan of some tweaks that have been made this past off season, but it's better. But in general, I think it works. So I think the 12-team playoff in general works. So there's no reason why you would change it. And I think it's what my dad once told me. The person who's got the least, I think it was something about just in your negotiations, the person who's willing to walk away is the one who usually is going to win. And I think the SEC is like, all right, if you guys are going to take a hard stance, we're just going to walk out because we're fine with the status quo. Whereas I think the Big Ten's not. So we'll see what happens. But I think if anyone's going to cave to anyone, it's going to be the Big Ten caving to the SEC, in my opinion.
Yeah, I don't dispute that. It's just so interesting to me though that ever since the 12-team playoff was adopted, the Big Ten has ran it, right? That the Big Ten has had the two best teams each of the last 2 years. Yeah, I think we both
they've
kind
gone
of
3 straight and they've won 3 straight, by the way, counting Michigan with the last of the 4-team edition.
That's true. Like we say that the SEC is top heavy, but the top of the Big Ten is heavier than the top of the SEC, and in theory, that should be all the negotiation leverage that the Big Ten needs to get what they want for whatever the next rendition of this expanded playoff may be. Yet we both kind of agree that the SEC ultimately, it's kind of their playing cards. They're kind of the ones in control. And I think that's because we both recognize there's a little bit of recency bias to say that the Big Ten has been more successful. It's been the last 3 years, but if you look past those 3 years and get to the last, 10, 15 years, the SEC simply does have, in general, has produced slightly stronger programs, and they seem to be running the show.
And I think too, especially I think their additions, when you just add the recent expansion, that's kind of put college athletics in this position where it's kind of tilted more towards this power 2, where the hierarchy is getting even more defined than it previously was. You're seeing, I think, not that I'm saying like I don't think the Big Ten made smart additions, getting UCLA, USC, Oregon, and Washington, but I think the Big Ten snatching Texas and Oklahoma, I think it's kind of proved to be better, especially since they've both been, I think, doing for the most part a pretty good job in really pulling their weight compared to some of the compared to obviously, the programs in the Big Ten. Obviously, Oregon has obviously come in and, done pretty well for the most part. USC, Washington are getting there, but USC and Washington seem to be getting there, gaining traction. We'll see what happens with UCLA under Bob Chesney. So you definitely need your new schools as well to be performing as well as everyone be, especially winning those non-conference games early, especially when you have those big marquee ones against, especially when it's an SEC school too. So it'll be very interesting to see how this all goes, in my opinion.
I will add though that and again, I think I made it clear, 2014 playoff, I find that to be too many teams. The one thing that to me makes the most sense for adopting that as the new playoff format is rivalries like USC Notre Dame will more easily flourish. I don't think there's nearly as much hesitation for that game to be played if there's going to be 24 teams making the playoff, because you have room to lose 3 games easily and you're in. You have room to lose 4 games depending on who you are as a program, what wins you have, what your losses are, who they're against, if they're on the road or if they're at home, if anyone was injured, if your quarterback was out. Like, a lot more context is going to be taken into consideration. And you have room if you're USC to play Notre Dame, and you don't, and same thing if you're Notre Dame playing USC. And I don't feel like you have to negotiate it as tough as they did. You don't need to like hold your stance as much, because then that game can kind of just be played. And, if you say every other year, you'll lose one of those, you'll lose that game every other year. It doesn't matter if you're USC or Notre Dame, because I hate to say it, if you can't make the 2014 playoff, you were never going to win the national championship. So I think rivalries will flourish. Rivalries that don't have to be played, like USC Notre Dame, out of conference rivalries.
Probably another thing I'm going to add is, you probably also don't have to hardline about when it's played either. You probably could go to when it's traditionally been played. You play it in mid-October in South Bend. In the odd years, you play it at the end of the season after Thanksgiving during the even years. So I think that would definitely be a perk of that for sure. Like, and obviously that is something that people are upset about, but at the same time, do we want to see a bunch of 8-4 teams make the playoffs? I mean, I'm even like, just now, as of now, even expands to 16, I'm like, even I see a team with 3 losses, I'm like, do they really warrant it? Especially with it. I mean, Alabama, like even them, like this year, I was like, because they got, pummeled by Georgia and they get in. 3 years ago, USC gets pummeled by Utah, doesn't get in. So I struggle with that. Granted, a little different, obviously. It was 2 losses. That was kind of, you couldn't have 2 losses. Now you can only have 1 loss. Now you can kind of have 2. So I get it in that regard, but still, it's like, is college football ready for it? Especially, like I said, we've just been moving expansion so quickly. So I think it would definitely benefit rivalries. And obviously USC Notre Dame isn't the only one, but it's probably the most prolific of all those non-conference rivalries that are like potentially in danger. Obviously, I think I saw something John Canzano reported today that sounds like Oregon State is looking to not play Oregon in 2027. They're already not playing this upcoming year in 2026. So then what happens from there? And not just obviously rivalries too, but just marquee matchups in general. Like Steve Sarkisian said about Texas playing Ohio State and Michigan, like over the last couple of years in the home and home format, is they're going to honor the contracts for those two. Cause I think there's the Buckeyes this year, then the Wolverines next year. But then after that, it sounds like they're really going to evaluate their non-conference scheduling, especially with the SEC now moving to 9 games for the first time heading into 2026.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. I mean, why if you're Ohio State, or why if you're Texas or Ohio State, I guess for that matter, but why if you're Texas would you ever want to play any more of those games after seeing what's happened this year? Like there's so many games that were lost either by a close margin or by an unnecessary out of conference game against another elite power school. Like why would you ever play that if there's going to be 12 teams allowed in the playoff, and if you lose 3 games, you're not in. But yeah, if you expand it to 24. That changes. If you expand it to 16, to be honest, I still think that's just not enough to encourage these teams to play those tough games. USC still cares about when they play Notre Dame if 16 teams make it, because you can't afford to get that third loss, or else you're kind of at the mercy of the committee when they compare you to the other 3 lost teams, and they're going to say which 3 lost team is better, and you don't want to take that chance. You want to be a 2 loss team.
For sure. And that's the other thing I do want to bring up is, as much as, I think everyone's been trying to push like, oh, we got, go by strength of schedule, I feel like that's kind of a tricky metric. Obviously, I mean, they do have the rankings and all that, but still, what if you have a bad loss anyways? And 2, it's like, sometimes are they even honoring it? And it can get tricky in that regard because you might beat a team, but then you have a bad loss. Like Texas beat Oklahoma. Like there's a case to be made just on that alone that Texas should have gotten in over Oklahoma. I think they got it right because of that, but at the same, especially even though the Longhorns beat the Sooners, the Longhorns did lose to Florida, who, fired Billy Napier this year. So you lose to Florida and you get blown out by Georgia. You beat Mississippi State in overtime. So you have a lot of losses where it's like, or just these games where, it's harder to tell and like how you played in them. So the strength of schedule thing can get tricky, but then at the same time, how do you just exactly measure it all? So that definitely does take some of it out by expanding the playoff. But I think it's like you said, it's just that balance of like, where do you just get it right? That's the tricky part. But still, it's just like, it seems like you're going to have to pick one or the other. And personally, I just think 24 teams is too much, even if it does mean we would get some of these great rivalries back.
And you know what the most annoying thing about this to me is, Crash. The most annoying thing about the debate of the 12-team playoff, at least for now, it may go away in the future once it's more set in stone and once everything's finalized, once all the rules and contingencies and kind of the semantics of it are finalized. But right now, no one will be happy no matter what happens. You keep it at 12. Obviously, any team that's ranked 13 and 14 would be very upset, or would have been the 13th and 14th team in, very upset. You move it to 16, the team that was supposed to be 17th and 18th in line are upset that you didn't move it to 24. No matter where that line is, someone will be upset. And in some years, maybe they'll have a right to be upset. Like Notre Dame probably had a reason to be upset because they looked like one of the fiercest competitors in college football last year. I think if you look a year ago, though, I guess 2 seasons ago, there were teams that were upset that they didn't get in there. But let's be honest, no one that didn't get into the first rendition of the 12-team playoff deserved to be in it, because there was not as much of a it was a more clear black and white who deserved to be in and who didn't. And
it
so
was
point
more
being,
that first year was more who shouldn't have gotten it, who got in that shouldn't have been in. Like,
Exactly.
could we have gotten away with like a 10-team playoff? Probably.
We absolutely could have. We absolutely could have. Last year, I mean, I'll for anyone who supports a 16-team playoff, I'll give them this. Last year, or this most recent season, last year, I guess, a 16-team playoff would have been better than a 12-team playoff for sure. But there's no guarantee that that's going to be the case next year. Next year, we might be back to only 8 teams that we even want to see in there. So, like, we're gonna keep having this argument.
At the rate we're going, 24 is not going to be enough. Before we know it, every FBS team's going to get it.
We're going to need 64 and then 68 because we're going to have a play-in just like March Madness, and it's going to be like a 3-week long. 3-week long while you're playing every 4 games like March Madness.
We're going to need to call up Mike Leach from the grave just to get his advice because he laid it out once, I think, in a press conference when he was still in Washington State. Rest in peace to maybe the greatest guy whenever he was in front of a mic. Never failed to deliver.
Absolutely. Best guy to have in press conferences, best guy to interview. And he was, I know exactly what press conference you're referring to. He was spot on with that. I wish I could recite exactly what he said. I can't, but I remember that he was ahead of his time on that. We need to be listening more to what he said with that.
We need to find a way to bring Mike Leach back to advise us on college football. He might be the one he should be in charge of running this thing. He would know how to set this right.
Yeah, no, he would do a better job than the committee has been handling it right now. I don't doubt you on that.
All right, I think before we go, Nolan, any final thoughts on anything we've discussed tonight?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say first of all, if there ever is a 24-team playoff, USC absolutely must make it in the first year of that playoff. There genuinely is no excuse. I would also say at the slow but clear rate that USC has been building a stronger foundation every year. Maybe the record fluctuates. USC started out great under Lincoln Riley, took a dip, and now we're back up. It's kind of like this, right? Like, up and down, but your overall trajectory is increasing. If there's a 16-team playoff, I expect USC to make it. And honestly, next year, Lincoln Riley has had, this is year 5. You got to make it. But especially if that playoff is expanded, or when that playoff is expanded, USC better be in there. USC better be in there.
Absolutely with everything you just said, Nolan. So that's going to do it for us here on the USC channel here at the Voice of College Football. This has been USC Primetime Live, presented by FanDuel, along with Nolan Ezett. I'm Crash Collier. Can't wait to see you guys all next week back here, 7 p.m. Pacific time, 10 p.m. on the East Coast. Now go turn on your TVs and go say 4 is down. Let's watch USC men's basketball beat UCLA. Fight on.